Russia is preparing something dangerous on Poland's doorstep, and they're not doing it alone. With Belarus at its side, Moscow is launching a massive military exercise called Zapad 2025. But make no mistake, this isn't just a drill. It's a strategic move with chilling echoes of the past. Because the last time Russia carried out exercises like this near a border, they invaded Ukraine. Now, all eyes are on Poland. So what exactly is Zapad 2025? Who's involved, and what's the real endgame? Let's take a look at where this all began. News of the Zapad, which translates to West in English, exercise, first came to light on February 20th, 2025. The Belarusian state-owned news agency Belta published a report detailing their plans. In that report, the Belarusian Defense Minister for International Military Cooperation, Valery Ravenko, revealed that Zapad 2025 would be held in mid-September. The event had already been announced in late 2024, but no official dates had been provided prior to that point. Ravenko also shared some insight into the scale of the event, stating that the exercises would be large-scale with over 13,000 people involved. Typically, Belarus would invite representatives from various Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or the OSCE, member states to observe the drills. However, Ravenko announced that for 2025, Belarus is developing its position around which states, if any, to invite, stating, "Again, we are not saying no. We are saying that we will look at the further steps that will be taken by the leadership of these states and the leadership of the defense departments." On April 10th, Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko shared more information on the Zapad 2025 event during an interview with the interstate TV and radio company Mir. "I've signed the directive concerning this exercise because it's necessary to organize it here and so on. Military training areas have been chosen. Although a war is in progress, Russia's special military operation is in progress. President Putin and I have agreed that we will put the war aside, that we will look into the future and see other directions and possible theaters of war, God forbid. This is why we will conduct the exercise. Belarus should play the main role due to certain reasons, because a lot of troops of the Russian Federation are busy. Time has come for us to demonstrate that we know how to do a lot. Russian army units will also be present here. This is why we will do everything to protect our common fatherland." Lukashenko went on to speak about how Belarus's neighbors to the west, including Poland, have, in his words, inflated tensions, adding, "We shouldn't just bear it in mind, we take it into account. This is why we organize military exercises, which are designed to bolster our defensive ability in connection with this behavior of our western neighbors." So what can we expect Zapad 2025 to look like? Well, it's important to note that it's not the first of Russia and Belarus's Zapad exercises. They've been held every 2 years since 2009, except in 2023, when the exercises were cancelled due to the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. We can look back to the most recent Zapad exercises, Zapad 2021, to get an idea of what Poland might expect to see not far from its borders later this year. Zapad 2021, for example, ran from September 10th to 15th, 2021, and featured the participation of around 200,000 members of military personnel, along with around 760 pieces of equipment, including 290 tanks and 15 ships. Numerous exercises took place over those 5 days, at more than a dozen military ranges in both Russia and Belarus, with personnel training for various situations like fending off enemies in urban conditions or carrying out precise strikes on stationary and mobile targets. At the time, Belarus's first Deputy Minister of Defense of the Republic of Belarus, Major General Viktor Gulevich, stated that the exercises were purely for defensive purposes. Zapad 2021 is purely defensive, and its holding does not pose any threat, either to the European community as a whole or to neighboring countries in particular. Zapad 2021 is planned and is the final stage in the system of joint training of the armed forces of Belarus and Russia this year. Its primary objective is to enhance the preparedness of troops from the regional grouping tasked with ensuring security in the Eastern European region. However, contrary to Gulevich's claims, many military experts later stated that the Zapad 2021 exercises were most likely carried out as a form of training and preparation before the invasion of Ukraine, which took place just a few months later. And this is one of the biggest reasons why so many people are rightfully and understandably concerned about the upcoming Zapad 2025 exercises. Some fear that history could be about to repeat itself and that Russia will use the exercises as some sort of cover to move troops, tanks, and other equipment closer to Poland, perhaps ahead of a full-scale invasion, or in preparation for a possible future war with NATO, which could arise if Russia continues to push onward into Ukraine or invades other nations like the Baltic states. There are genuine reasons to be fearful, as it's not just Zapad 2025 that Poland and NATO need to worry about. Other reports have suggested that Russia is taking several additional steps to strengthen and expand its presence on Belarusian soil, moving more and more troops into the neighboring nation. At the recent Munich Security Conference in February, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made the claim that Russia intends to deploy 15 divisions, totaling up to 150,000 troops in Belarus. In his view, this is all part of a major military escalation with NATO. Based on all the information I've gathered from intelligence and other sources, I think he is preparing for war against NATO countries next year. More recently, in April, upon learning about the Zapad 2025 plans, Zelensky echoed his previous warning, sharing his view that the exercises could easily be a pretense for more Russian attacks. Look at Belarus this summer. Russia is preparing something there under the guise of military exercises. This is how its new attacks usually start, but where this time? I don't know. Ukraine, Lithuania, Poland, God forbid, but we all have to be prepared. All our institutions are open to cooperation. Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrskyi has also issued a warning for Poland and nearby nations. All exercises have a purpose, and one of these goals is the covert creation of offensive troop groups. The visibility of the exercises is the most acceptable way to relocate, redeploy troops, concentrate them in a certain direction, and create a group of troops. Ukraine isn't the only one warning of this either. In February, a report from the Danish Defense Intelligence Services (DDIS) found that Russia could have the opportunity to launch a full-scale war in Europe anytime in the next 5 years, clearly stating, Russia perceives itself as being in conflict with the West and is preparing for a war against NATO. While no decision to initiate such a war has been made, Russia is building the capacity to make that choice if deemed necessary. The report also suggested that should the war in Ukraine end or come to some sort of standstill, that would not necessarily represent the end of the conflict. Russia could theoretically remobilize its forces to attack a neighboring nation within just months, with the likes of Poland and the Baltic states particularly at risk. The bad news doesn't end there. In an April 28th report, the Wall Street Journal revealed that in addition to its Zapad 2025 plans, Russia is also strengthening other positions near NATO borders. Most notably, its military engineers are working to expand bases in the Russian city of Petrozavodsk, which is around 100 kilometers away from the border separating Russia from Finland. According to the journal, the Kremlin intends to create a new, large-scale army headquarters in that area, with plans to train and house tens of thousands of troops over the next several years. At the moment, many of those soldiers are serving on the front lines of Ukraine, but Russia is always thinking long-term. Putin appears to have plans for those same members of military personnel to form the backbone of his next military maneuver, a face-off with NATO. Multiple recruitment drives are in force across Russia to bolster army numbers. Weapons production is also being put into overdrive, and transport networks, in particular railways, are being upgraded and extended to strengthen Russia's military logistics. There are numerous statistics to back this up. For example, before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia had around 1 million active-duty troops, but Putin has urged intensive recruitment to push that number up, with a target of around 1.5 million. The country has also drastically increased its military spending, which was around 3.6% of GDP before the war, and has since risen to over 6%. For comparison's sake, the US spent around 3.4% of its GDP on defense in 2024, and many European countries spend between 2 and 3% on average. Russian production of artillery and munitions is expected to rise by around 30% in 2025 alone, and the country is also churning out more drones than ever before, often of superior quality to those that came before. It's also working on creating more advanced, AI-powered, autonomous drones, with the capacity to strike targets without needing any kind of manual operation. The ongoing levels of Russian recruitment also make for intimidating reading. The country has leaned on the tactic of offering generous, one-off sign-up bonuses at both federal and regional levels, encouraging men of varying ages to join the military in exchange for cash rewards of up to $20,000. Ika Koronen, director of the Bank of Finland's Institute for Emerging Economics, notes, "These one-time payments have gone up considerably, making them more than what many people would earn for an entire year otherwise. And thanks to this, estimates suggest around 30,000 or even up to 40,000 new Russians sign up for the army per month." On top of that, both federal and regional governments across Russia have improved benefit schemes for military veterans and their families. They're giving soldiers the chance to sit on city councils or even join the Russian parliament, and all of this makes it easier than ever to add more men to the Russian ranks. General Christopher Cavoli, commander of US forces in Europe, summarized the situation. Despite extensive battlefield losses in Ukraine, the Russian military is reconstituting and growing at a faster rate than most analysts had anticipated. In fact, the Russian army, which has borne the brunt of combat, is today larger than it was at the beginning of the war. Even after 3 years of fighting, Russia can call on more troops than it did in the first days of the invasion. That's a worrying fact, and it further reinforces the findings of the Danish intelligence agency and Zelensky's fears that Russia could indeed plot and execute further invasions in the months or years to come. The Kremlin has also adjusted its military strategy quite significantly in terms of how it organizes and supports forces within the country. It's created entirely new defense-oriented districts for its two biggest cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg. The Moscow military district, for example, has seen new road and rail routes built and upgraded, with new connections formed leading into Belarus, allowing for faster and easier deployment of troops and vehicles there as needed. But even more transformation is taking place in the Leningrad Oblast around St. Petersburg, which is close not only to Finland but also to Latvia and Estonia. There, small brigades will see major reinforcements, becoming divisions of up to 10,000 troops. New barracks and training grounds will be built, and railroad lines will be strengthened, particularly in and around Petrozavodsk. It all points to one thing: Russia does not appear to have plans to de-escalate its military campaigns. If anything, it seems eager to show its strength at every opportunity, bolstering its ranks no matter the cost, and positioning both troops and equipment in key locations that send a clear message of intent toward the NATO nations it sees as its biggest enemies. As if to confirm that fact, Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, recently issued genuine threats against NATO members, calling out Finland and Sweden in particular. Now they are in a bloc hostile to us, which means they automatically become a target for our armed forces, including potential retaliatory strikes and even the nuclear component or preventative measures within the framework of our military doctrine. Medvedev added that before joining NATO, such countries enjoyed certain international preferences from Russia, but that those preferences were now void. They simply put themselves in the crosshairs of our armed forces. Did their life get better? No. These are political games. Fortunately, Europe and its allies are not simply sitting around and waiting for Putin to move his pieces into position. Multiple steps are being taken on the Western side to counteract whatever maneuvers Russia might make. For starters, spending is going up. In December 2024, the Financial Times reported that European NATO foreign ministers were working on plans to increase the alliance's defense spending target from its current 2% of GDP up to 2.5% by 2030, encouraging all allies to spend more on their military forces. In the US, which is by far the most powerful military in the world, spending is also set to rise, with President Donald Trump talking of a $1 trillion budget in 2026 and urging NATO countries to increase their spending much more significantly, suggesting a target of 5% of GDP. The countries closest to Russia, and therefore most at risk of any possible invasion or attack, have also been taking steps to counteract Putin's acts of aggression. For example, in response to news about the upcoming Zapad 2025 exercises near its border, Poland has issued a clear and bold response. Its defense ministry has announced military exercises of its own on Polish soil. The defense minister, Cezary Tomczyk, stated, "Poland will respond to the Zapad 2025 exercises, which will be held in Belarus, in an appropriate manner on the Polish side." He added, "We will respond to these exercises both as the Polish army and as NATO. There will be a large Polish and NATO exercise in Poland, large maneuvers. Let us also remember that last year we had the largest NATO exercises in history, which gathered around 100,000 soldiers. NATO is stronger than Russia." Tomczyk was referring to the Steadfast Defender 24 exercises, in which more than 90,000 troops were involved in drills that partly took place in northern regions of Poland. Part of those drills saw around 20,000 troops from 9 allied nations testing NATO's deterrence and defense capabilities, particularly in key regions like the Suwalki Gap between Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, and Russia. Poland is also another nation that has boosted its defense spending in recent times, elevating it to around 4.7% of its GDP, which is the highest relative rise of any NATO nation. For this country, time is of the essence, with Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kozyniak-Kamysz stating, "We don't have too much time. We must build a strong alliance, a strong command system, and well-equipped military forces." Finland, too, is taking big steps to both monitor and respond to increasing signs of prospective Russian aggression. This, after all, is a country with over 800 miles of border separating it from Russia, a border that is simply too long to guard in its entirety, potentially paving the way for Russian forces to enter at any point. Having joined NATO after the Ukraine invasion, Finland is making some upgrades. It has fitted sections of barbed wire and electronic defenses along its border. It's also using its strong surveillance technologies to monitor Russian movements, particularly in and around the St. Petersburg area, and has historically maintained heavy investment in its military, with a national service system encouraging all of the country's men and some of its women to undergo at least some period of military training. Of course, even with training, investment and equipment, the likes of the Polish and Finnish military forces still pale in comparison to Russia's in many metrics. On the Global Firepower 2025 military strength rankings, for example, Russia sits as the second most powerful military force on Earth, behind the US. Poland, meanwhile, takes the 21st position, and Finland is much lower in 48th. Russia has at least 1.3 million active duty members of its military, plus another 2 million reservists. Poland, meanwhile, has just 200,000 active duty personnel and around 350,000 in reserve, while Finland has a small active duty force of only 24,000 but close to 900,000 reservists. As far as equipment goes, Russia has 5,750 tanks and more than 130,000 armored vehicles, along with vast quantities of artillery and the second largest aerial force in the world, with over 800 fighter jets and more than 550 attack helicopters. Poland, meanwhile, has a little over 600 tanks, 23,000 vehicles, and less than